Well, well, thank you very much, Mark. I was waiting for the speaker to turn up because I wasn't sure that was me that you were talking about. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction. Just a quick one for everyone. Do we have any Star Wars fans here? It's a good thing I didn't put on my Jedi outfit. Um, but look, very good afternoon to you all. I'm hoping that we're going to have a wonderful couple of days of thought-provoking discussions, fun and camaraderie as a peer group. So I'm really looking forward to that. My name is Amit Gupta, as Mark pointed out, so I don't think I need to introduce myself. I will jump straight into it. I have 18 minutes. The counter hasn't started yet, but okay. So, you know, we talk about the purpose economy. We've looked at by the way, the slides aren't moving here on the screen. Yeah. So, we have been through 3 years of a really, really rough patch and actually come out a lot stronger. I think if there's one thing that we have learned is that there is no such thing as perfect. And to ensure that we don't let perfect get in the way of better is something that we've applied to digital transformation. So, sorry, could you do the slides? Because I can't actually see it on this. So, I think the one thing that we have picked out from this is the ability to, think about what's impacting our planet, our people. The pandemic was really a watershed moment. It taught us many, many things, and among them was the ability to actually consider and reflect whether there was an opportunity to do a hard reset of our own way of life. Climate change is one that we've talked about for many years as a nice sort of dinner conversation, but I think it's become front and center for us. If I quote Sir David Attenborough from his speech from last year at COP26, he actually made a very prolific statement. He said verbatim, if I repeat what he said, was, "I have seen a terrible decline throughout my lifetime, and I hope that the next generation will actually be responsible for a wonderful recovery." And I think that message is resonating very, very clearly with the next generation. And that's one of the themes that we want to talk about. But the reality is climate change is important globally, but in India we have many other things to consider. You think about the societal shifts. We have a young population, 65% of our population is under 35. We have a growing middle class. We have a lot more consumption. We have access to social media. And what that's created is a very aspirational economy and an aspirational generation. And they have needs and desires. They're much more aware of issues that are global issues that they're tackling. And that's also creating another issue in India, and that's wealth inequity. And this is a global problem. If I share some stats with you from a global perspective, in 2009, 308 of the world's richest billionaires accounted for the equivalent of the bottom half of the world's population, their wealth. Do you know what the number, anyone want to take a guess what the number was in 2019? 26 billionaires. And that disparity gets even worse when you start to look at markets like India, right? So wealth inequity is going to create issues, and we have to deal with it, and technology is one of the ways to deal with it. The face of talent is changing. I'm going to talk about talent. We're going to have conversations around talent, but I will touch on that in more detail as we go forward. But I did also want to highlight that we are in a state where there's a lot of uncertainty caused by geopolitical shifts. It's, the war in Ukraine. I mean, we don't hear a lot about it because, fortunately, we're not all directly impacted by it, but it does create an impact on the business and the economy. The geopolitical shifts have been simmering away for a few years. So there is a lot of these foundational shifts for us to consider as we think about what's the way forward, because we all have our quarterly goals, our annual targets, but I think there is a place today and room for what we are terming as the purpose economy. And if I move on to my next slide, I'll just touch on the 4 forces of innovation that we see are actually going to shape the way businesses will move forward. And every business, every enterprise is going to become a digital enterprise. So, and enterprises are realizing much more, they're realizing, I guess, much more aligned with the fact that the next generation, as I said, are much more aware, and they are going to be the next set of consumers and talent that businesses will need. And they have to fulfill their needs. They have to fulfill their expectations. There's an expectation from consumers and people who are going to work as employees that organizations and enterprises are going to reflect a certain kind of values, certain kind of value system. So the 4 forces that we want to talk about today are, one is sustainability. It's about building a better planet for the next generation. We've got to think about how do we enhance employment through skills and a greater experience. How do we create an experiential economy, and not just from a consumer standpoint? There are a whole bunch of applications that we can consider. But as they say, charity has to start at home. So we have to think about what are we doing with respect to employee experience. And then finally, I want to talk about the social safety nets, because the one thing that every government has realized in the last 2 years is this is not just their opportunity, but if they don't actually set up these social safety nets to take care of the societal impact of, God forbid if we had another situation like the pandemic again, but governments realize that they have to play a bigger role in supporting not just business, but supporting its citizens. And it all ties in together. Our research has shown for India that 19% enterprises have a focus on sustainability. By the way, let me repeat that, just 19%. And sadly, the rest are still looking at sustainability as part of their CSR budgets. But sustainability is not CSR anymore. It is absolutely part of the core mainstream. Let me put a different lens on that. One of the more core aspects of business is the cost of capital. And the cost of capital is going to change dramatically for organizations that don't actually comply with the sustainability norms that are going to be set up. And these are going to be global norms. And we are in a very globalized economy, and we will all get impacted. So organizations do have to start to consider that. And financial institutions are really struggling, and they're challenged by the fact that they have to make sure that their portfolio of customers or investments will actually comply with it. Because otherwise, they will have to look at the net emitters very differently. So there is a very, very practical, number one reason is the cost of capital. We've all heard about transition finance. It will start to apply, and we have to start to think about it. So sustainability, in my view, absolutely has to be one of the core business imperatives. But there are some other practical benefits of sustainability as well, both tangible and intangible. So the one is the growth rates. We know that the growth rates of sustainability products and offerings is actually outpacing traditional offerings. We also know that from an investment standpoint, impact investments, specifically around climate tech, is the fastest growing part of the investment ecosystem. So you know that there's a lot more capital going into that. Sustainability initiatives in some industries do actually really add to process efficiencies, cost efficiencies, and we've seen that because it helps streamline the supply chains. For many organizations, sustainability is not really an option, right? If you run data centers or if you're a utilities company, it is a serious risk mandate because there's a whole amount of reputational risk that's associated with sustainability. And with the net emitters, and if they don't actually follow through on a path to decarbonization, it will have a flow-through effect to the rest of the industries as well. And finally, we know that organizations that are really focused on these core values and ESG and sustainability, we know that they actually have a much better chance at attracting and then retaining talent as well. And that brings down your cost of business as well. So I hope that I've been able to give you some perspective on that. And then in terms of talent, what do we say about talent? The world has changed around us. We have an office in Bangalore, and I was asking our team how many people actually turn up to the office. I don't think anyone said they turned up. And we're absolutely comfortable with that. We work through that. I don't think anyone has any issues. We've learned that. And our research has shown a direct correlation between employee experience and customer experience. It's a very old saying. You look after your employees, they'll take care of your customers. There's no other way to say it. And I think in today's hybrid environment, employee experience becomes absolutely essential, and it has to take a more personalized form. And there is a big impetus. A lot of organizations are actually following through on creating a much more personalized framework using technology and a digital experience to be able to give their employees that experience and create a greater sense of affinity, not just for themselves, but within the teams. It also allows the leadership to be able to look at their employees through the personas that they expect them to have, but then also be able to assess how they're performing. And it does create a much stronger sort of connect with the leadership. And from India's standpoint, this is India's decade, right? It truly is. There is no other way to put it. I mean, we had 62 unicorns in the last 1 year. And if you think about one of the biggest shifts in the talent space globally is this whole concept of borderless talent, right? I mean, of course, I think a lot of people in this room are very familiar with borderless talent. I mean, outsourcing has been a big part of the strength that India's brought as part of the digital revolution. But we have the largest digital talent pool in the world. And the ability to leverage that and access that talent from a global standpoint is, I don't think there's ever been a better time to do that. And then finally, when you look at human-machine collaboration, just think about the power of how you can actually augment your workforce with technology, whether it's AI, immersive tech, or the digital twin. And I'm actually going to share an example with you, and I'll move on to my next slide because it sort of plays into that. I've been asked by many around various use cases for the metaverse, and how real is the metaverse? Is it a reality? And my view on that is it is virtual reality till you actually put a use case to good use, right? But there are some good use cases. There are use cases that are being applied. There are use cases being applied not just globally, but in India. And workforce augmentation is an example. Now, the example I'm going to share with you is one that has been in play, not in India, but we've seen it in play in Singapore, right? So when we went through this whole disruption around travel, let's just call this guy Bob. Bob lost his job at Changi Airport. What does he do after that? Where does he find his next big break? Bob was able to get assimilated into a utilities company where he was skilled through a short-term program. And with the use of immersive tech, AR, VR, AI, and the digital twin of the entire grid, Bob is actually able to work on-site to fix faults at the substation. Because he dons on his glasses, he can be guided through that process, and where he struggles, he's guided by the engineer and the supervisor who sit at the grid headquarters. So there are some real use cases there. If we think about process efficiencies, there's actually a company out of India that is actually built, they're actually using the metaverse specifically around creating efficiencies in the shipping industry, because they're able to get a digital twin of the port, of the vessels, and they're able to manage the whole process in a way that's so much more seamless. They get visibility and predictability into issues that they might face from an equipment standpoint, helps them actually really bring down, the data point is it brings down their cost of operation, or actually the time of operation, by 20%. I have my colleague who's an expert in supply chain logistics. He's going to speak later, so he might be able to give a little bit more perspective on some of these examples. That's you, Kaushik. So, and then for India, just 1.3 billion consumers. Just think about the possibilities in the whole immersive consumer experience. We're in the World Cup. I don't know how many of you are following that. I'm not following it as much, but my co-founder, my business partner, he's German, so I have to follow all the German games. But it is it's going to change the whole dynamic in India. Think about how many people have accessibility to actually go and watch a game in person. Not many, right? But everyone's smartphone accessible. So think about how you could give them that experience where we could replicate what's happening. For example, if you're talking about football, if you look at Manchester City, they've created their own space to allow fans to engage in that and get an experience of being in the stadium without actually physically being there. Their biggest rival, Manchester United, has followed suit. They're doing the same. They're using NFTs as part of the fan merchandise. And why look at the UK? I mean, I was literally going to crack a joke about the UK politics and the new Prime Minister, but I think that's not appropriate here. But I would say, you've got to look closer here. We look at the Gujarat Titans as part of the IPL. They launched their space on the metaverse. Now, I haven't really tracked how well that's done and how much they've progressed around that, but this is just the beginning. I think it's just the beginning of something very special, and it's an opportunity for us to really think about how do we actually change the consumer demographic? Because today our consumer demographic is linked to you and you and you as individuals, but with the metaverse, the consumer demographic changes. You're bringing in a whole bunch of new personas that are coming in there that could be your target audience or target customer set. I referenced the social safety nets earlier. I think this is a topic that's very, very close to my heart. I think we've seen that the biggest stimulus to digital transformation has come from governments. And I think it creates this whole framework where if the industry aligned with the pieces that the government is trying to drive, it's a massive amount of opportunity and potential that can be harnessed. So let's look at healthcare. I mean, we all know remote health. We've talked about remote health. I'm sure everyone talks about it. Access to pharmaceuticals and drugs, doorstep delivery. Think about when everything was locked down, how is healthcare being accessed? Actually, I have friends now, since the pandemic, I actually have friends in Singapore who consult with doctors out of India because they feel more comfortable with them and they're more accessible because they do it virtually. The only thing they haven't been able to figure out is the drug prescriptions, but I guess we'll get there. But at the same time, in the healthcare sector, it's going to come down to data. Everything's going to come down to data. It's going to be about giving much better clinical outcomes. It's going to be about reducing medical wastage. So think about how much equipment or how much of the replenishable, disposable consumables are wasted in the healthcare system. If you were able to track that, but most importantly, think about if you empowered a consumer who sits in a rural part and gave him access to their healthcare data, their medical history, their diagnostics history, and that became portable, the possibilities it opens up for them to be able to access the whole hub and spoke model much more effectively. Because it takes down so much friction and cost for them, so much inefficiency. Because otherwise, what happens, the guy gets a diagnostic test done in Amritsar, comes to Delhi or comes to Mumbai, and they'll want them to do it all over again. But if you actually streamlined it, it just removes that entire friction. Financial inclusion, just the India stack, I think, is one that I think India should feel really, really proud about. The UPI gets talked about so much. Our company, Ecosystem, we are the official knowledge partners of the Singapore FinTech Festival in Singapore, which is run by Singapore Central Bank. And I tell you, the number of times I hear the example of the India stack is just amazing. I love hearing that. But what it does is it actually brings and empowers every Indian citizen or business to participate in the mainstream economy. It's all about inclusion. And I think as you start to build around that, you'll see possibilities around digital trade that get implemented. The next step will be how do you create more seamlessness for trade between India and other parts that are key trade partners. I had the privilege to actually co-host Nandan for a dinner that we hosted at Thai a couple of weeks ago. And I cracked a joke with him, and which was, I said, does your co-founder son-in-law actually reach out to you and say, hey, can you help me fix the financial system in the UK, right? And the reality is, he said, I get asked that question by so many governments asking how can we build what India has built? And I think if we're not playing into that whole framework, I think we're missing an opportunity. Supply chains. India has a massive opportunity around this whole supply chain ecosystem. And if you think about it, you will see a lot of unicorns that have come out of India that are actually now playing at a global stage. And part of the reason is, if you can ship products to 1.3 billion people efficiently, I think that's a great use case out there. And I think that there's a lot of best practices that are learned from that. So, but from a supply chain perspective, my question always is, how do you apply that to real world scenarios where it actually helps the person on the person on the ground? So could you apply supply chain or supply chain tech, whether it's blockchain, AI, the whole piece around IoT and sensors? Could you apply that to the agrarian economy in India? And you think about how much you could benefit from that. You would actually reduce food wastage. Did you know that 70% of the food produced from farm to fork gets wasted because of the supply chain? Because it doesn't get through all the stages. And if you reduce that, the amount you can actually, the amount of impact you can create by being able to give back and be able to feed a lot of people, I mean, that's a great place to start. And finally, education. My time is almost up. Education, I wanted to say, that is the big equalizer. And I think technology has everything, and India has all the, we have, all the building blocks, the foundation pieces from an education system, the ability to access technology, and it's about then creating options for how do you actually make that technology more consumable by a larger set of people, right? So, and education, access to education with technology doesn't just mean in rural parts where you actually help people access learning options, but it's also that's at the bottom of the pyramid. But at the top of the pyramid, if you think about it, you can use, again, immersive tech, AR, VR, you can use digital twins, you can use, enabled by 5G services, you can actually give access to students to an experiential learning zone, to a real lab environment, whether it's like a chemistry lab, whether it's like a biology lab doing dissecting of specimens and so on. So my one piece takeaway is, if you really think about it, we've got to read the tea leaves, because we can, while we prepare for next year, I think we've got to build for the future. And reading the tea leaves is really about understanding the foundational shifts. What are the forces of innovation that are accessible to us, and how do we actually create that impact? Business models will pivot for sure. Business models for every enterprise will pivot. I mean, there is no other way. In India, for sure, it will. I mean, India is producing the maximum number of unicorns that are coming in with a very different business model, and industries will evolve, industries will change. The opportunity we have is we can shape the talent that we want for the future today. So shape your talent for your future enterprise today. And I think, we have the benefit in India of as I said earlier, the largest global digital talent pool. And finally, I just wanted to say, if you look at the boardroom discussions, the boardroom, the CEO, if you're looking at sustainability, the chief sustainability officer, they all need help from the CIOs and CDOs. Bring them on the table for the discussions and the impact that you can create. If we actually think about, if I just close on the purpose economy piece, I just wanted to say, digital will be the big equalizer, and hopefully, if I quote Andrew Grove, and the co-founder of Intel, what he said was, crises always end. How we deal with the crisis will actually shape, how we emerge at the end of the crisis. And I actually think we're in a good spot. I think we've emerged stronger. And my only key takeaway for everyone here in this room is to really think about what's the impact that technology can create to the future generations, and work your business plan backwards from that. And may the forces be with you. Thank you.